Let's go to our topic of the day, where we'll be discussing about Jakarta gearing up for the 43rd ASEAN Summit. After successfully hosting the G20 Summit in Bali in November 2022 and the 42nd ASEAN Summit in Labuan Bajo, East Nusa Tenggara last May, Indonesia will again take center stage in the 43rd ASEAN Summit in Jakarta in September this year. As this year's chairman of ASEAN, Indonesia will gather world leaders at the summit to ensure world peace and stability.
The 43rd ASEAN Summit will be held in Jakarta this September and will be attended by representatives from all members of ASEAN, partner countries, and a number of international agencies such as the International Monetary Fund or IMF and the World Bank. Unlike the 42nd ASEAN Summit in Labuan Bajo, East Nusa Tenggara last May, the 43rd ASEAN Summit in Jakarta will not only be attended by leaders of ASEAN member countries, but also heads of states from partner countries. Under the hybrid working program, a half of the city administration's employees are asked to work from home. President Joko Widodo is slated to chair 12 meetings during the summit, which will be held at the Jakarta Convention Center, or JCC, Central Jakarta on September 5th to 7th, 2023, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Director General of ASEAN Cooperation, Sidarto R. Suryodipuro, told journalists during a recent press briefing. Series of meetings during the summit will be held in plenary and retreat formats, including the 26th ASEAN-China Summit, the 24th ASEAN and Republic of Korea Summit, the 26th ASEAN and Japan Summit, the 11th ASEAN-US Summit, the ASEAN-Canada Summit, the 26th ASEAN Plus 3 Summit, the 20th ASEAN-India Summit, the 3rd ASEAN-Australia Summit, the 18th East Asia Summit, and the 13th ASEAN-The United Nations Summit. The ASEAN leaders will hold an internal organization meeting on September 5th. The next day, ASEAN will hold summits with some partner countries. Meanwhile, East Asia Summit and ASEAN Plus 3 Summit will be held on September 7th. A number of bilateral meetings between ASEAN leaders will also be held on the sidelines of the 43rd ASEAN Summit. As many as 26 world leaders and heads of international organizations are expected to attend the summit, including those from East Asia Summit member countries, Pacific Island Forum or PIF member countries, Indian Ocean Rim Association or IORA member countries, and executive directors of International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. In line with the theme of Indonesia's chairmanship, ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth, the series of ASEAN Summit is expected to promote the achievement and foundation of ASEAN Vision 2045, as well as to strengthen ASEAN's institutional capacity in terms of more effective and efficient decision-making process and organizational matters. It will be the fourth time for Indonesia to assume ASEAN chairmanship, and this time, Indonesia wants to lay a foundation for future ASEAN strategic cooperation. To achieve such objectives, Indonesia will strengthen ASEAN's institutional capacity and its work mechanism, including efforts to develop ASEAN resources. Several important topics will be discussed during the summit, such as the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone, the ASEAN Maritime Outlook, food security, energy transition, and future cooperation in trade, investment, and digitalization within ASEAN, an environmentally friendly economy as a source of new economic growth. Indonesia has indicated a number of issues to be included in the recommendation of the 43rd ASEAN Summit or ASEAN Concord. Indonesia always produces an agreement or ASEAN Concord every time it serves as chairman of ASEAN. Indonesia served as chairman in 1976, 2003, and 2011. When Indonesia assumed the ASEAN chairmanship for the third time in 2011, the resulting agreement or ASEAN Concord included the establishment of the ASEAN Economic Partnership and an agreement to strengthen the ASEAN community internationally.
Indonesia will hold the 43rd ASEAN Summit in Jakarta in early September after successfully organizing the 42nd ASEAN Summit in Labuan Bajo, East Nusa Tenggara last May and G20 Summit in Bali in November last year. Here, our guest this afternoon, Riza Arfani, the Director for the Center for World Trade Studies, is at Gadjah Mada University, Yogyakarta. Riza will discuss with us through live Zoom on the implementation of the ASEAN Summit on Indonesia's economic diplomacy. Hello, Riza.
Hello, Luisa. Very good
Hello,
morning.
Riza. Welcome to Economic Outlook. Riza, the upcoming ASEAN Summit, which will be held in Jakarta early next month, this will discuss various regional and international issues, not only among ASEAN members, but also between ASEAN and partner countries. Riza, in your opinion, what benefits Indonesia can get in promoting the country as a new economic powerhouse in the region?
Yeah, in terms of the benefits that we could have from these summits, we could identify at least two areas of the benefits that we can have. The first one would be diplomatic. It's the time once again for us. It is the opportunity for us to showcase our capacity in holding such events, such a big event. Not only in terms of organizing it, but also in terms of how to take the benefit of the agreements that we will be having lately. In the second one, certainly on economic areas, where I think the partners that we have been invited in such meetings are the key partners of our trade, our investment, and development in general. So meetings with them would serve as a common platform, common grounds to understand and to respond to the economic difficulties, economic uncertainties, I may say, that we face together at the global level and also at the interregional levels. So that's the benefits that we could have, at least the two areas that I mentioned earlier.
Now, Riza, the ASEAN Summit will also be a major negotiation forum between ASEAN and major trading partners such as China, Japan, South Korea, India, and Australia, as well as the United States and Canada. In your opinion, what are the implications of such multinational gathering on Indonesia's economic diplomacy?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, the summit would be a key factors in setting up the common grounds between ourselves, Indonesia, and also ASEAN, and its major trading partners. So in terms of the economic diplomacy that we could have, it is the opportunity to show the trading partners that our economic diplomacy would be based on our very national interests or positions in key commodities and key sectors. And these trading major trading partners would serve as a catalyst for us to cooperate, to collaborate in those key commodities and sectors. And as also we have learned, two major sectors would be the extractive one that would really relate to our SDG targets to be the net emission country by 2060. The second one is on how these commodities also relate to inclusive trade, to inclusive our inclusive efforts to also include some other stakeholders in these key commodities such as um, the mining industries, but also in terms of plantation industry. For example, in palm oil industry, that would be the main the key factor that we could have major collaboration between these countries and us in Indonesia. So that's probably the major stance that we need to show our partners in terms of our economic diplomacy.
Parisa, speaking of palm oil right there, with the
Yeah.
involvement of major trading partners, do you think that Indonesia need to raise the issue on the need to fight against discriminatory trade restriction by some countries on certain Indonesian commodities, say such as palm oil?
The answer would be certainly yes, a big yes for that. It is a time for us to assert ourselves, to show our assertive economic diplomacy, that we indeed have our positions on that, not only in terms of environment, that has been the major debate among ourselves, but also in terms of the welfare of certain sectors in Indonesia that relate to this industry. We need to show them, our major trading partners, that we have done our best to pursue those two targets. We have done so through many initiatives, or even many good practices or practices to show that we are comply with those standards, environmentally speaking, but also the basic needs for our economy as a whole is also the major targets that we need to show in our so-called assertive economic diplomacy in this very nature of summits here. And I think by having these summits as part of our stance, diplomatic stance, but also economic stance, we would like to show that yes, we need to have the so-called that I mentioned earlier, common grounds. We need to identify sort of like winning sets among ourselves in our negotiation. And these ASEAN platforms would be, I think, one of the best platforms that we have, diplomatically speaking. And I think that kind of things that we need to really showcase in these summits.
Riza, let's talk about economic policy now. This year, Indonesia assumes ASEAN chairmanship under the theme ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth. What should this summit produce in terms of economic policy to make the region as the center of the growth as aspired by Indonesia?
Yes, probably what we need in certain urgency, is that we need to have policies, economic policy that are based on sectors or commodities. I would say key sectors or key commodities, to show, first of all, that we are connected. We have integrated supply chains. We have integrated commodity chains. And to show, secondly, that we have the roadmaps to do so, that the roadmaps that are based on sectors, the key sectors or key commodities that we have. I would say that the major sector would be plantation, and in much more specific one is palm oil. I think we need to have certain stance towards that in terms of our economic diplomacy in the face of this very, what do you call it, very complicated situation that we have, especially with the promulgations of deforestation regulations in the EU area, EU countries. That's probably one of the things that we need to really have very detailed policy on palm oil that capture our positions in the supply chains and our positions in also having initiatives to capture the value chains, the value added that is not based only on our economic interests, but also in terms of environmental interests, but also in terms of how to deal with these least fortunate sectors, the smallholders. If we take palm oil as an example, or the indigenous people, if we talk about the mining industry, and how they then could be one of major beneficiaries for our policy. So we need that, and we need to make sure that the ASEAN summits would then have deliverables on that. And I think Indonesia would take the lead on that, based on our experience in the past 10 or 15 years in our key commodities and key industries.
Now, Pariza, in realizing that this vision to become the center of growth, do you think that ASEAN should be turned into an integrated economic hub so that the member countries can work together to attract investment as well as to promote trade?
Yes, the answer certainly is, once again. And this really in parallel with our ASEAN economic community pillars, in which I think we have agreed that we need to be the hubs of productions, the hubs of supply chains, the hubs of value chains on certain sectors, commodities. And I would say that the sectors would be a couple of sectors would be the key on that. The first one, manufacturing sectors that have been very developed very rapidly in the past 20 years in many major ASEAN countries: Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, and also Singapore as a financial hub also matters in this kind of sector. And we need to really select certain manufacturing sectors that would be the par excellence, the best practices of ASEAN countries. I would say two sectors. Electronic, it would be really related to our digital economy. And the second one is also automotive. Those two sectors would be the par excellence examples of how we need to cooperate, not only at the government level, but also at the business and industry levels. I think those two sectors have been the evidence, have been proof that we could do that in terms of collaboration regionally, and in terms of how we prepare ourselves to be the hub of the production, the design, and capturing the value added of these manufacturing sectors. The second one would be on the so-called extractive sectors. We could again, once again, take palm oil as the example of how we do that. And I think the two countries, the two key palm oil players, Indonesia and Malaysia, could be the leaders on that. Once again, we need to form an alliance, not only among ASEAN members, but also with other like-minded countries in other developing countries that face similar challenges in terms of environment, in terms of social welfare, and so forth. And apart from that, I think digital sectors would be the catalyst on that. And I think we have shown our efforts to do that, and ASEAN members have also really put digital transformation as part of their economic transformation and industrial transformation.
Parisa, now that you have mentioned about the digital sector, digital transformation is one of the priority agendas under Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship. Some ASEAN members have actually agreed to implement digital payment system to boost cross-border trade. Now, what other aspects, in your opinion, that ASEAN should implement in promoting digital transformation in the region?
Yeah, in terms of digital economy and how we transform from the conventional economy to the digital one, I would say that what we have agreed during these summits on digital payment is sort of like um, a very important path towards digital inclusion. And that terms of digital inclusion should also embrace some other aspects of digital transformation, such as, for example, the key pillars would be digital literacy, where I think we need to capacitate ourselves among the members of ASEAN to educate people, to train people in terms of these very natures of digital transformation. How we do that, I think we have agreed on certain key efforts to do that, key measures to do that. And I think education would be one of the areas that need to be also concerned. Other than that, I think infrastructure development, digital infrastructure development, would be the areas need to be really taken into account very carefully by ASEAN members, as we still have digital divide among ASEAN member states itself, but also within an ASEAN member itself, like Indonesia. We have also a problem with that. Thailand, the Philippines, they also have with that, with certain degrees of differences. I think we need to fill the gap on that digital infrastructure. I think we have also done so during these summits. But also, we need to take into account the challenges of security that posed by digitalization or digitization in our digital world.
Hmm.
So cybersecurity agreement need to be also put at the table or of our negotiation in ASEAN. Yeah.
There's certainly a lot of homeworks to be done there on the way to achieve
Yes.
digital inclusion. That's the future.
Mhm.
Bapak Riza Nur Arfani, the Director for the Center for World Trade Studies at Gadjah Mada University, Yogyakarta. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and thoughts with us here on Economic Outlook. Have a good day.